Parsha in a nutshell. Sorry about that. Parsha in a nutshell. So we get a summary here, and here we go. Moses kitavo, when you will come. Moses instructs the people of Israel, when you enter the land that God is giving to you as your eternal heritage, and you settle it and cultivate it, bring the first ripened fruits, bikurim, of your orchard to the holy temple, and declare your gratitude for all that God has done for you. So it's called bikurim, which means first fruit. The root of the word is bechor, which is firstborn. So this is the firstborn person. If you're a farmer and you sat and you plowed and then you planted and then you prayed for the rain and then it rained. Every day you come outside and you want to see when is the first fruit going to show up. When the first fruit shows up, you're overtaken with joy. That first thing is for Hashem. It doesn't have to be a lot of fruit, but it has to be first. Then our parsha talks about how you would bring that fruit to God, to the temple, and what you would say in gratitude for bringing the fruit. So the actual words you would say, which is unusual in the Torah, to tell you how and what to pray. So we'll talk about that maybe. But in any case, we get the version of what you're supposed to say. Our parsha also includes the laws of the tithes given to the Levites and to the poor, and detailed instructions on how to proclaim the blessings. And okay, so that's the end of the mitzvot, the tithes. And there's a specific mitzvah, because you already heard about the tithing to the Levite, second tithing, and the poor. But now there's a specific instruction, which we'll get to later. And detailed instructions on how to proclaim the blessings and the curses on Mount Gerizim and Mount Eval. Again, this ceremony at Mount Gerizim and Mount Eval was recorded earlier in the book of Deuteronomy, in Re'eh, 3 portions ago, where Moshe says briefly, when you enter the land, you'll have a ceremony on these 2 mountains where you'll proclaim the blessing and the curse. And here we have an elaboration of what exactly is supposed to happen. Obviously, it's the Torah, so it's not so clear. So there's multiple opinions. And even after Moshe's elaboration, it's not exactly clear what the blessings and what the curses are that we did on Mount Gerizim and Mount Eval. So maybe we'll talk about that as well. Okay. Oh, here they allude to, as discussed in the beginning of the Parsha of Re'eh. Moses reminds the people that they are God's chosen people and that they in turn have chosen God. Okay, the latter part of Kitavo consists of tochacha, rebuke. After listing the blessings with which God will reward the people when they follow the laws of the Torah, Moses gives a long, harsh account of the bad things, illness, famine, poverty, and exile. That's an understatement, by the way. That shall befall them if they abandon God's commandments. Moses concludes by telling the people that only today, 40 years after their birth as a people, have they attained a heart to know, eyes to see, and ears to hear. In other words, the first time you hear something, it's nice, but you cannot be expected to internalize it. 40 years later, a generation later, you could already internalize the words of the Torah, and therefore it is our responsibility to do so. I remember that when I was about, 9 years old, 8 years old, it was the 40th anniversary of the previous Rebbe's passing. And for the whole year, the Rebbe quoted this verse. And finally, 40 years after we had been taught the teachings, now it has come the time that we have no excuse, that it has to be internalized. So as a kid, we always heard that verse, and they actually made a song. They composed a song, a Hasidic song, with these words. So that brings back the memory. Okay, that is the story in short. If anybody wants to jump in and say what they're interested in, please do. Otherwise, we start at the beginning. Deuteronomy chapter 26, verse 1. Kitavo, when you will come into the land. If you happen to have an art scroll, not necessarily pushing this version, it's just the one I have in front of me. If you have the art scroll, it's on page 1069. 8 or 9, depending on what language you're doing, or you're doing both at the same time, which is fine as well. To open my notes, otherwise. I'm sorry?
I learned a sort of interesting little thing yesterday that when you look at the letters for Bechor, and you think about that, it's that the firstborn would be getting the double portion. All 3 of those letters are the only letters in Gematria that the letter before it it's twice the letter before it. So the Aleph to the Bet, the the Yud to the Chaf, and the Kuf to the Resh.
Right. So I'm not sure if you're saying more than what I'm about to say, or saying the same thing, but Bechor is, oh, that's what you're saying. Okay, I see what you're saying. Okay. So Bechor, it's a strange word because Bechor, the letters, every letter has a number. So it's 2, 20, and 200. Right? Bechor, 222. If you would write it at digits, not that they wrote in digits then, so I'm not going to make believe they did, but it's the twos in the singulars, in the tens, and in the hundreds.
Oh, I didn't even see that part. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And you're saying that so that's the question. Why would the firstborn be called 2? Why would 2 be the constant theme in the letters that make the firstborn? I would think firstborn should be 1. So your interpretation is a nice interpretation. You're saying that that you get a double portion. So you're in the 2 business, right? You then double. 2 is double, could be double what's before. That's good. I once read that. What's the idea of the firstborn? In other words, in Judaism in general, when you say the firstborn gets a double portion. Now, I don't want to get into politics because we do this every Sunday and we still stuck with the Yaakov and Esav and the blessings and the double portion. So it's a minefield. If I get stuck in there, we're going to be here for a full hour. So I don't want to do that. But in Judaism in general, there's a firstborn. There is double portion. In general, responsibility or the rights of the priesthood or whatever it's going to be. So from the perspective of the Jewish perspective, every right is really a responsibility toward the rest of the people. So even the notion that we are the chosen people, like it says in the nutshell that we just read, God chose us. So we don't exactly use that word choosing, but that's another story. God says that Sinai will be a kingdom of priests. Oh, we have a priest, so it's wonderful, it's so great. No, priesthood means you have to serve everybody else. There's a verse that says, God tells Moshe to tell Pharaoh, B'ni B'chori Yisrael, Israel's my firstborn child. What does it mean? We're the best? No, it means the firstborn's responsibility is to take care of the other members of the family. So in other words, every time when you have a position of authority or leadership, it's not for yourself, it's for what you're going to give. In that light, 222, you would think the firstborn to be focused on self. I'm the firstborn. There was a time that it was only me. I had all my parents' attention, probably all my grandparents' attention, and probably all my grandparents from both sides' attention, right? So they have a good ratio of 6 adults for 1 child when you were the firstborn. Then the next one comes on the block and that steals all the attention. So we remind you, the whole purpose that you got all that attention is so you could now give to your brother or to the next one, to the follower. So there's the orientation of the firstborn is not on self, it's on the second. So that's another way of looking at 222. In any case, back to the Bechor, because you have the first fruit. So the first fruit have to be brought to God. And there's a whole declaration. It's a long declaration. You bring the fruit from on page 1069, from chapter 1 to chapter 11. You have on and on and on. You bring it and you do exactly what you're supposed to do and exactly what you're supposed to say. And you mention the history of the Jewish people. And I always say that you want to say a story. Well, what's the beginning of the story? What's the beginning of the story? Well, it depends. Depends. You want to say the story of, depends how far you want to go. The story of the President Biden. Well, it's to happen that in the 1600s, the pilgrims came to Plymouth Rock. I mean, you can't start from before. I mean, you can start before that if you want. I mean, you can always go how far back. So we're coming to God and saying, God, I brought you these fruits. That's a very simple statement. But where does the story start from? It goes back to my ancestor, to Jacob. At this point, it's hundreds of years ago, hundreds of years before, right? So it's a strange thing that the Torah gives us so much information about what to say when we bring these fruits. Part of the problem is that this is actually not the biggest gift that we give to God, or that we give to God or to others. We're supposed to give almost 20% of the produce, but if you by the time you've done all the different various tithings, you're giving away almost 20% of your produce. How much produce do you give for the bikurim, for the first fruit? A basket. There's no amount. You give your first fruit. It's a first fruit. There's no big amount. So it's a very small gift. but obviously it has a tremendous amount of significance. And therefore we come and we make a big deal. And we show up and we talk about our history, and we talk about how God fulfilled the promise and brought us to the land of the flows of milk and honey, et cetera, et cetera. Something is happening here. It's not just about the fruit. The question is what? And the question is which interpretation you want to talk about. But something is happening here. So what I want to do is just to read a few verses just to get a little bit of the flavor. We'll read 11 verses, right? The world won't come to an end. And it will be when you come into the land which the Lord your God gives you for inheritance, and you possess it and settle in it, that you shall take of the first of all the fruit of the ground, which you will bring from your land, which the Lord your God is giving you. And you shall put them into a basket and go to the place which the Lord your God will choose to have his name dwell there. Don't fill up a semi 18-wheeler trailer. Put it in a basket. We're not talking about a lot of fruit. And you shall come to the Kohen who will be serving in those days, and say to him, I declare this day to the Lord your God that I have come to the land which the Lord swore to our forefathers to give us. So he says, I showed up here. In other words, it's almost like saying, God fulfilled the promise. We're not done yet. And the Kohen will take the basket from your hand, laying it before the altar of the Lord your God. And you shall call out and say before the Lord. And like I said, this is one of three places in the Torah that the Torah tells us exactly what to say. None of the prayers were dictated by God. Even the Shema Yisrael, which we say, which Moshe says, doesn't say specifically we have to say. It doesn't say so explicitly. Here, the Torah says, say these words. You're bringing these fruit, read this liturgy, read these verses. It says it two other places, one which on the next page and one of the priests. The Torah tells us exactly how the priests should bless the people, Birchat Kohanim. The other one is next page. But in any case, this is a big deal. Torah is very careful. You have to say these points. Even to bless God, benching, to bless God, which is a biblical commandment after you eat, the grace after meals, doesn't say what you should say. It doesn't say you could say whatever you want from the biblical perspective. The rabbis get involved, so we end up with 4 blessings that take multiple pages. But from the Torah's perspective, say what it doesn't say what to say. Here, this is exactly what he's supposed to say. So here's what we're supposed to say. And you shall call out to say before the Lord your God, an Aramean sought to destroy my forefather. And he went down to Egypt and sojourned there with a small number of people. And there he became a great, mighty, and numerous nation. And the Egyptians treated us cruelly and afflicted us, and they imposed hard labor upon us. So we cried out to the Lord our God, the God of our fathers, and the Lord heard our voice and saw our affliction, our toil, and our oppression. And the Lord brought us out from Egypt with a strong hand and with an outstretched arm, with great awe and with signs and wonders. And he brought us to this place, and he gave us this land, a land flowing with milk and honey. And now, behold, I have brought the first of the fruit of the ground, which you, O Lord, have given to me. Then you shall lay it before the Lord your God and prostrate yourself before the Lord your God. Then you shall rejoice with all the good that the Lord your God has granted you and your household, you, the Levite, and the stranger who is among you. That is the end of the story of the Bikurim. And then the next page, we get to the question of the next mitzvah, which is the tithing. But what's happening here? What's all this talk? What's all this telling us of exactly what to say? Yeah.
How practically did it happen? Didn't most people have their fruits growing at the same time? So wouldn't there be a rush? With people showing up?
It sounds like it's very one-on-one.
Yeah, it's very interesting. It's very interesting that you mentioned this because probably when you went to the temple, you probably went during the pilgrimage holidays, probably, right? Practically speaking, many people went on the holidays because on the holidays is a commandment to go anyway. But you're right, when it talks about all the holidays, it talks about it in general terms, it talks about it in the plural. Every male should be seen at the house of the Lord, right? Before Hashem, your God. So you're coming with hundreds of thousands of people. This story, the way it is written, is talking about the individual. So the first answer is you don't have to come on the holiday. Come whenever you want. And you say that everybody came together, but also depending what business you are in. And each fruit ripens in another season. Starts from a little bit after Passover, but I think the latest fruit in Israel to ripen would be the olive, of the 7 species. And the olive, God does this as late as I think after the holidays, October, November. So people would bring really till Hanukkah, even though you can only declare this, I think, till Sukkot. We'll talk about that in a second. the bottom line is you can do whatever you want. The Mishnah talks about how people would actually make processions in the spring. It's the springtime, so people want to travel. So people would make processions from their different fields, various fields, and go up together in groups. Not massive groups, but groups. But yeah, it's an individual thing. It's between you and God. A very different feel than what you get in the holiday. In the holiday, you get, I'm one of the community, right? Here, it's, I have a personal thanks to give to God. It's a whole different, it's a different feel that you get. You picked up on that, correct? Okay, so by the way, I say this every year, I'll say it again. I don't want to spend too much time on this. There is a mitzvah to say the story and elaborate on the story of the Exodus on the night of Passover. That's what it says. Say to your child. What should you say to your child? What exactly should you say? Which book should I buy to say? So today you're lucky, or you're not lucky, that it's in the Haggadah. There is a book that the sages put together that tells you exactly what to say. But where do the sages get that? So going back to the Mishnah, the times of the Mishnah says, you need a text. You can't just tell people, say the story. Where do I start from? Where do I finish? So what did the sages do? They actually took the text of this week's Parsha. They took the text from verse 5 until verse 8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 4 verses. That is the synopsis of the Exodus. And not just the Exodus, the slavery and the Exodus. So they say, take these verses, read them, and elaborate upon every word of them. But that should be your outline. And that's exactly the way the Haggadah is built. After we say Avadim Hayinu, after the 4 questions, we say a few introductory passages, and then we quote these verses, and then we elaborate upon every verse. The Egyptians are, how do they translate it here? The Egyptians mistreated us. Okay, then we start quoting what that means, and we elaborate upon that. We find verses in the book of Exodus which elaborate on the mistreating. But the outline are these verses. Why did the rabbis take these verses? I don't know. Probably because here is God himself, or Moshe himself, actually, Moshe speaking. Moshe himself tells you the synopsis and tells you these are the main points. These are the points you have to hit. So that's what the Mishnah says. The Mishnah says, how do you tell the story? You read the story, the verses from Arami Eved from the Arami and sought to destroy my father, and then you elaborate on this entire portion, and that's what we do. So if these verses sound familiar, it's because they are in your Passover Haggadah. Okay, what's happening here? And there's a lot more to say, a lot to talk about. I'm just going to be brief, and I think I said this point in the past, so you'll forgive me if you already heard it, but I think I have to hear it again. The culmination of all of this is verse 11. Right? If you want to look at verse 11, after you say and you clear and you say everything you need to say, then you shall rejoice with all the good that the Lord your God has granted you and your household, you, the Levite, and the stranger that is among you. The point is to bring you joy. God doesn't only want you to have what you need, but he wants you to be happy. If you ever, the most frustrating thing as a parent should never happen to you. But if you take your kids on vacation, it doesn't happen to your kids, but some kids, you take them on vacation and they're not happy. Or you buy them something, you do something nice for them, and they're not happy. They're like, this is like a waste of my time. What's the point of schlepping you here all the way? Get onto the plane, cross the desert, 40 years in the desert to bring you here, and I give you everything you need, a flat land that flows in milk and honey. You're not even happy. So what's the point, right? We could have stayed in Egypt, right? If you're not happy, you could have not been happy at home. Why do you have to not be happy on vacation, right? So what happens here is, what you see here is the culmination of all of this is samachta b'chol ha'tov. You should rejoice with all the good. So God wants you to be happy. The question is the $1 million question. It's actually a very good industry because people make a lot of money on this. How do you become happy? So how many self-help books, how many gurus, happiness gurus, every psychology department has experts in happiness. How do you become happy? What do you do? So I guess if you fulfill this, if you read this passage, if you read these 10 verses, you're going to be happy. That's what the Torah says. You shall rejoice. Shall rejoice. We discussed this in the past that in Hebrew, a shall, the future tense, it's very hard to tell other than looking at the context. The word itself, it's impossible to know if you mean commandment or you mean prediction. And you will rejoice. Does that mean you should rejoice, or that means you will? Right? One and the same. So they're tied in. If they're commanded to, means that ultimately it's going to happen. But the point here is, this could be read, you do this and you will rejoice. So the ingredients to joy must be in this passage. So what are the ingredients to joy? So the ingredients to joy, if if you want to really distill this, the ingredients to joy is gratitude and meaning. That's all it takes. I don't know if you can do one without the other. You probably could, but if you have two, you're the safest. Okay. So to gratitude, that we all understand. Any happiness expert that will tell you that if you take your blessings for granted, there's no way you'll be joyous. It's an impossibility. You can have pleasure, but you won't have joy. It's impossible. So you have to be grateful. That's what we do. We take the fruit, we bring it to God. We say, God, you gave this to me. Thank you very much. And you have to verbalize it, which is another story. Torah goes out of its way to tell you, speak about it. You want to tell someone thank you. Don't assume that they know that that you're thankful. It doesn't work. You have to be grateful. You have to specify, and you have to be specific, and you have to articulate. Okay, so that's gratitude. Okay, gratitude. Fine. God, thank you very much for bringing me to the land that flows with milk and honey. Thank you for giving me this fruit. Beautiful. But that's not enough for joy. It may be enough, but it's not. Ultimately, there's another ingredient, and the other ingredient is that the human being needs meaning. There has to be meaning to my existence. It's not just that, thank you very much. You gave me a house, you gave me a car, you gave me money in the bank. Now I can live. What is this all about? Ultimately, when you reach my age, you start getting the midlife crisis, and you start asking yourself, what is the meaning of all this? Right? What's the meaning? So you have to have meaning. So you have to understand that your existence is in the context of a greater story. There's a purpose here. And that's what we're saying. We're saying, I'm not just a Jew living in Israel. There's a history. We went to Egypt. I'm part of a people. We have a mission that we're on the go. We're moving from, we moved from Egypt to Israel. The purpose is to make the land of Israel a holy place for God. That's the symbol. Again, I'm not saying this is our whole mission is articulated, but it's clear that I'm not an individual person. So even though Amy is right that says that I'm speaking as an individual person, this whole portion is the individual person bringing his first fruit to God. But then I say, I understand that there's a story. My story doesn't start in 2022 when I'm thanking God for my assets. That's not where the story starts. The story is I'm part of a people, and we have a history, we have a divine promise, and we have a destiny, and I'm part of that. And then you could be happy. Which means without that, you could be happy to a degree, but the full joy has to come from gratitude and meaning. We could talk about this all day because everybody writes self-help books on happiness, so I should also, but we'll talk about this for the rest of the hour, but we have other things we need to do. So we'll stop here unless anybody wants to question or elaborate. Otherwise, we continue. Next story. I want to go to maybe we'll try to do a chunk at a time. Next story is what they call, in the nutshell, they said that it's about tithing, but it's more specifically, it's the verbalization of the tithing. You at the end of the 3-year cycle, which we'll talk about in a minute, you tell God, I fulfilled all my obligations. I did everything I needed to do. The sages refer to this as confession, which is very strange because usually you think of confession as negative, but confession is really verbalization. So there's a mitzvah, after you finish all your tithings, say this expression, say these words. That's exact. And again, here's the other place where the Torah tells us you exactly what to say. And Torah tells you exactly what to say. And there's a 3-year cycle. Okay, so the way this works, let's think about this quickly. The way this works is as follows. There's a 7-year cycle. 7th year is sabbatical, so you don't plant anything, so there's no tithing. So you end up with a 6-year cycle. 6-year cycle is divided into 2 3-year cycles. As we'll read in verse 12, at the end of the 3rd year. What happens the 3rd year? So what tithings do you have to give? So what you have to give is as follows. Every single year, you have to give what they call Ma'aser Rishon, the first tithing. First tithing goes to the Levite. The Levite is somebody who is the tribe who did not get a portion of the land of Israel, so they have no food, so they're poor. So you have to give it, and this is a big percentage. It's 1/13 of the Jewish people have no land. So every Jew gives 10%. You give 10% of your produce to the Levite every year of the 6-year cycle. So therefore, of the 3-year cycle. Then you have what we discussed a few portions ago, a very strange type of tithing called Ma'aser Sheni, the second tithing. What's the second tithing? The second tithing is that you go and you The second tithing is that you go and you take 10% of your produce after the first 10% has been deducted, and then you take that and you eat it in Jerusalem. So it's for you, but you have to eat it in Jerusalem in the context, in the holy context. And then the third year of the cycle, so that's year 1 and 2. Remember, the first tithing to the Levite is every year. The second tithing that you will eat in Jerusalem is year 1, 2, 4, and 5. Year 3 and 6 is the tithing to the poor. There weren't that many poor people because everyone gets a portion of the land. It's very hard to be very poor if you own land. It's true then, it's true now. But there were poor people. So the tithing of the poor is year 3 and year 6. And that's what we're going to say. This week, this portion on page 1071 in the Art Scroll. At the end of the third year, after you finished giving all the tithings to the various people who you're supposed to give it to, you finish this distribution. Because remember, the point here is that year 1 and 2 and 3, I designate 10% and I have to give it to the Levites. But when do I have to actually give it to the Levites? So you don't have to give it to the Levites at this minute. Whenever the Levite shows up, you give it to him. But there's a deadline. At the end of the third year, you have to rid your house of your home. There's an expression that we say about getting rid of the chametz, bi'ur chametz, to get rid of the chametz, bi'ur. So the sages use the same, the Torah uses the same expression, bi'arti hakodesh min habayit. I got rid of the holy from my house. We don't mean get rid of the holiness, we mean get rid of the holy produce, and you have to do that at the end of every 3 years. So that's what we're going to say. And when you do so, you make this declaration. So let's read the declaration. The article, page 1071, verse 12. Over here, it is second reading. When you have finished tithing all the tithes of your produce in the third year, the year of the tithe, Rashi says, year of the tithe is the year of the tithe, meaning the tithing of the poor, right? You shall give them to the Levite, the stranger, the orphan, and the widow, so that they can eat and satisfy and to satiety in your cities. Then you shall say before the Lord your God, I have removed the holy portion from the house, and I have also given it to the Levite, the stranger, the orphan, and the widow, according to all your commandments that you commanded me. I have not transgressed your commandments, nor have I forgotten them. I did not eat any of the second tithe while in my mourning, nor did I consume any of it while unclean. Neither did I use any of it for the dead. I obeyed the Lord my God. I did according to all that you commanded me. Now, this is a confession. Usually confession on Yom Kippur, you get up and you say, I sinned, I murdered, I stole, etc. But here, no. Here confession is, say all the things you did right. Therefore, we say, look down from your holy dwelling from the heavens and bless the people of Israel and the ground that you have given to us. As you swore to our forefathers, a land flowing with milk and honey. In other words, you tell God, listen, we have the deal going. I did exactly what you told me. Now you keep your part of the deal, which is bless the Jewish people and bless the Adamah, bless the earth. So that's what they call Vidui Ma'asrot, the confession of the tithing. It's interesting that, like I said, this is the conclusion of the mitzvot of the Torah. There's 2 more mitzvot at the end, to write the Torah and to gather all the people and read the Torah, but that's part in the context of concluding the Torah. Right now, this is the end of the specific mitzvot. So it's interesting that you have Bikurim is the beginning, the first fruit, and now we're talking about Kitachaleh, when you have finished. So we have almost the beginning and the end of the 3-year cycle. The beginning, you give to God a few fruits, then you can enjoy. But at the end, you have to make sure that you make this declaration and you make sure that you gave all the produce to God. So there's a lot to talk about here, and there's a lot to say. And why is this the end? Why is this so important? So I'm just going to make a point or two, and that is as follows. We talk about tithing. Now, what do you have to tithe for? We look at tithing as you have to support the people who don't have money. So we have to help them. Who do you have to help? These are the list of needy people. You have a list of needy people, and therefore divide it between the 3 years or 6 years, and then you take care of all the needy people. So that's a very superficial way of looking at it. The deeper way of looking at it is that when the Torah tells you who to tithe for, what the Torah is really telling you, what are we supposed to value? What are the needs, and we have to respond to the needs. but what are the causes in society that we have to value, and therefore we have to designate money to? If you want to build a healthy society, so what are the Jewish values that you want to uphold? So the first thing is, and they call it the first, because it's the first tithing. It's the first thing you do. Ma'aser Rishon, first tithing. What's Ma'aser Rishon? You give it to the Levites. What are the Levites? The Levites are the people who dedicate their time to spirituality. So if you want society to be uplifted, to be spiritual, to be connected to God, you need certain people, not everybody, but you need certain people to devote their time, certain segment of the population, to devote the time to matters of the spirit, things that are not agriculture, which is very important. But if everybody's invested in agriculture, there's nobody here to develop ideas and to develop the spirituality and the way to connect to God. So that's the first thing we wanted. So when we say as a society we have to give to the Levites, we're saying is that in society we have to create a space for spirituality to develop. Now remember, my point here is to say that I have to do the same in my life. It's not just society as a whole. So what are the values? How should I spend my money? So the first thing is, so I can cultivate spirituality, time and books and to read and to have the time to cultivate the spirituality. That's the value. What's the second tithing? Second tithing is I eat the produce, but I eat it in Jerusalem. So what value is that promoting? That's promoting that a Jew, the goal is not necessarily to be connected to spirituality, but to sanctify the physical. If you could eat fruit and rejoice and eat produce and rejoice, but do it in a holy context, that's the symbol of what you're supposed to do all day. You have to do it all day, every day of the year. But when you go to Jerusalem with your fruit and you say these are holy fruits, I have to treat them like holiness. I can't eat it if I'm impure. I have to eat it within the walls of Jerusalem, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm eating physical food, but my physical food becomes holy. That's the second thing. So the first point is spirituality. The second thing is, could I sanctify the physical? That's the second value. And then the third value is, could I transcend myself and connect to somebody else? That's tithing of the poor. So that is the values of Judaism. Dedicate time for spirituality, sanctify your physical reality, and transcend and connect to others. These are the three tithings. And that's why it's the conclusion of the Torah, of the mitzvah, because in some sense, that's everything we're trying to achieve. And of course, that's true in our life. We're supposed to do the same, even though today, if we're living out of Israel, we don't bring all the tithings in the exact same way. But as an idea of what we're trying to do, that's what we try to do. I just want to say that this explains why the tithing of the Levite has to come first. And this comes into the Bikur in the first fruits. So you say, well, my goal is to sanctify the physical. Okay, so wake up in the morning, cook up a good breakfast, sanctify the physical. Doesn't work that way. First, you have to become spiritual. First, you have to dedicate time to spirituality. Then you could sanctify the physical. How are you going to sanctify the physical if you're not spiritual? So therefore, the first thing is the first tithe, which is every year, but we call it the first. That's the first step. The first step is dedicate time, create a space for the spiritual Levite within yourself. Create space for spirituality within you. Then you will be able to do the second tithing, which is sanctify your physical, sanctify the physical. But the spiritual has to come before. Otherwise, you can't sanctify the physical. That's point one. Point two, which I should have said earlier, is that all the Hasidic masters talk about this, and they say, Bikurim, first fruits. Today, we don't necessarily bring our first fruit, especially if you're living out of Israel. Even in Israel, you can't bring it to the temple. There's no temple. It doesn't apply in the same way. But they say, the Medrash already says this. This doesn't start from the Hasidic teachings. It goes back to the Medrash, that Moses saw that there'll be a time, there'll be no more Bikurim, first fruit, because there's no more temple. Therefore, he established prayer. That's what the Medrash says. 3 times a day is corresponds. Somehow or another, that lines up to the first fruit. What's the connection? The connection is the same thing. The connection is the beginning of your day has to be devoted to spirituality. And if the beginning of the day is devoted to spirituality, then that affects the rest of the day in a profound way. So you don't need a lot of time for God. I always say, God doesn't want a lot of time, but he wants to be first. And that's the Bikurim. Because the first, that sort of sets your tone for the whole day. And that's consistent with the idea that we say the tithing for the Levi, which according to this interpretation represents dedication to spirituality, precedes second tithing, which is eating my fruit in Jerusalem, which represents the notion of sanctifying my physical. First, you need spiritual, then you can sanctify the physical. And then the test that is correct is if you transcend yourself. If you indeed sanctify your physical, then you'll be able to transcend yourself when somebody else is in need, and that's the tithing of the poor. So that is a little bit on the first fruit, a little bit on the tithing. We have a lot more to go. We got to keep going, but go ahead, Vicky.
Oh, thank you, Rabbi, and thank you for getting our priorities straight. And that's very, very useful lesson. But I had a question about verse 14. I haven't eaten it in any intense morning. So what haven't I eaten? I just put it aside. I haven't eaten it at all, right? But is there a lesson there that you don't have to eat it in a state of intense mourning and stuff like
You're not allowed to eat the second tithing in a state of intense mourning, because as we mentioned, I think we mentioned it then also, the purpose is the joy. Pasha Se'eh, when we talked about the second tithing, was the first time the Torah tells you rejoice, by the way. Before Deuteronomy, there's no mention of joy in the Torah. It does say holidays. But there it says you have to samachta, to rejoice. It talks on the holidays. Does it talk about it in the holidays before Deuteronomy? I don't know that it does.
but it says any of the commandments. I don't think it applies only to the second, third.
Especially the second tithing. Joy comes from wholesomeness. Joy comes from the physical and the spiritual being in line, right? My physical existence is connected and wholesome with my spiritual existence. So joy is a very important theme for the second tithing, and therefore you're not allowed to eat the second tithing with intense mourning. By the way, you mentioned other commandments. You also can't do other commandments in intense mourning. Intense mourning, from the perspective of the halacha, biblically speaking, intense mourning is onen. He says oni. Oni is a term which says intense mourning. Biblically speaking, it's the day of one of the 7 close relatives die, that day. According to the rabbis, it doesn't apply only to the first day, but it applies till burial. That's onen, that's intense mourning from the rabbinic perspective. Now, at that state, a person is not obligated to do many of the commandments. So, for example, tefillin, we don't put on tefillin because there's certain commandments that require mindfulness, like tefillin. Purpose of the tefillin is to be aware of the oneness of Hashem. So you don't put it on. So you're right. It's not just the tithing, but the first tithing it's one of the commandments. One of the 365 commandments is that we're not allowed to eat the second tithing in Jerusalem in a state of joy, because the purpose of the second tithing is to be on vacation, spiritual vacation, a vacation that connects your spiritual and physical existence and creates wholesomeness between the two. And you have to be happy for that. And if you're intensely sad, so don't eat the first tithing, eat something else. Holiness and joy are synonymous. They go together. The two sides of the same coin.
It just here, it's not clear that it only applies to the second tithing, because it says the kind of after all of it.
The way we know is
not supposed to eat at all, right? The other ones are not supposed to eat at all. You only supposed
that's how we know it, right? That's how we know it. In other words, the first tithing is for the Levite. I'm not allowed to eat the first tithing, period.
Thank you.
Can I ask you a quick question, Rabbi?
Yes, please.
So just quickly, because I know you want to move along. If spirituality has to come first, like in the morning, is that why saying Moda Ani and Shema in the morning is supposed to start off? But what happens if, especially with children, but not your children, but to my child, if we say it every morning, and I'm getting the sense that she's just saying it, like almost because we say it every morning, but she's not internalizing it. It's just like a thing she's doing until then she could ask for something after, or move on to the next thing. So like your kids understand it, and I'm just making her say it, but I thought after a while she would connect to it, but she's not. So
I would say a few things about from this parsha. First of all, my kids, I'm not going to name names, and I'm not going to say, not anybody here, but I have a few of them, so I can talk in general. Some ages you have to incentivize. They don't want to necessarily say it. But I would say two things. First of all, is the end of the parsha. As we mentioned, the end of the parsha, Moses says, "Oh, now you have a heart to hear. Now you have eyes to see, ears to hear, and a heart to feel." In other words, it takes 40 years for the messages to sink in. We should not expect that a message that we're trying to convey to our children, we're going to see how it's affecting them immediately. Don't expect it's affecting them. You're planting the seed. But Moshe says 40 years you'll be able to see. So that's my response. I could also say the same thing in other words. They do studies on this. I have my mother's cousin who's not religious, and I haven't seen her ever in my life. I met her once 2 years ago. She lives in New York, but our worlds are so different. We didn't cross paths. She's my mother's cousin. Yeah. So she wrote a book about all different cultures about the power of ritual. So ritual is when you do something and you do it all the time, even though in the moment this specific act seems to be not meaningful, right? But for your child, when she turns back on her childhood, ritual has a tremendous impact on people, even if they don't notice it, and even if they don't notice it immediately. So I would say continue doing what you're doing. That's my suggestion for what it's worth.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Related to this parsha, like I said, we're planting. We don't see. We're not at the harvest. A lot of times we come and wake up in the morning and want to see the harvest. When that's not the harvest. We're not in the harvest season. We're in the planting season. Planting season lasts at least till they leave your house. At least, probably till they're 40. But that's another story. Okay, where were we at? Next story. It's not exactly clear what's happening, but Moshe is saying, Hayom Hazeh. If you look at page 1071, this day. So we shifted. We're done with the specific commandments, and now we're looking at covenant. Moshe is telling the people, God is choosing you. You got to keep your part of the deal. And we're going to enter the land of Israel. We're going to have a ceremony. 6 tribes on one mountain, 6 tribes on another mountain. The Levites stand in the middle. The Levites proclaim the blessings and the curses. And then we get to the end of the parasha with blessings and the curses. It's all about this day. If you look at page 1071, verse 16, Hayom Hazeh, this day. Right, so the third reading. Deuteronomy, this day the Lord your God is commanding you to fulfill these statutes and ordinances, and you will observe and fulfill them with all your heart, with all your soul. Okay. I want to focus on verse 17 and 18 for a second. Spoke about it many, many years ago, but it was a different angle. Nothing that we're going to say now. But it's very important to understand from the perspective. There's so many other ideas that are related to this. So I'm going to try to read verse 17, 18, connect it to the time of the year we're in, and then connect it to from here to the end of the parsha. So we're going to make one big dish. So bear with me. I'm going to try to do it in the next 7 minutes, God willing. So this is by the way, it's a very tricky word in the Torah. I wonder how they translated it here. Rashi himself says, I have no idea what this word means. I have not found a testifying word in the Bible. What does Rashi mean? What Rashi means is as follows. Initially there was no dictionary for biblical Hebrew. So if you don't know what a word means, what does a word mean? Well, what you have to do is you have to find a similar word elsewhere in the Hebrew Bible, and maybe that will tell you that these words are related. So when Rashi says, I'm not sure what the word means, he says, I have not found another word to testify about this word. The idea of trying to make a biblical dictionary in Hebrew only started in the Middle Ages. I think the first one who did it was Menachem ben Saruk. He was a gentleman that Rashi quotes, and he lived a little before Rashi. So we're talking about a little over 1,000. No, he would live probably 200 years before Rashi. So we're talking 1,300 years ago was the first time they tried to systematically make a book. He called it Machberet, which in modern Hebrew means just a notebook. And that was basically the first biblical dictionary. There were other scholars in the Arab Muslim countries which started getting into philology and thinking about what words mean. Rashi quotes another guy named Dunash ben Labart. Sounds like an Arab name to me, which is fine. Here Rashi says, I have no idea what this word means. So this is going to explain. Then he offers 2 possible suggestions, but he does sort of qualify that I'm not 100% sure what they mean. There's no perfect source. So what word am I talking about in verse 17? Verse 17 reads as follows. You have selected the Lord this day to be your God, to walk in his ways and to observe his statutes, his commandments and his ordinances, to obey him. You have selected the Lord. Marta. Literally, Marta comes from the word amirah, speaking or to beautify. So, but here they translate selected. You have selected the Lord this day. What's interesting about verse 17 is verse 18. And the Lord has selected you this day to be his treasured people, as he spoke to you, and so that you shall observe all his commandments. So what do we see here in verse 17 and 18? You selected God, and then God selected you. That's the pattern. You select God, God selected you. Now, I'm not 100% sure that was the order. That probably wasn't really the order that this happens. But this touches upon a very important point, and that is that who takes the first initiative? Is it we select God, God selects us, the way verse 17 and 18 portrayed, or is it a little bit different? So this leads to all kinds of areas, but I'm going to be specific, talk about the season of the year we're in. So going to the Song of Songs, which we spent a lot of time on last year. What is the Song of Songs? Song of Songs is one of the biblical books, 24 books of the Hebrew Bible, that is basically a love story between man and woman, and the meaning is between God and the Jewish people, either collectively or personally, without getting into all of that. In the Song of Songs, there are two verses. One verse that says, Ani l'daidi v'daidi li. I am to my beloved, and my beloved is to me. I am to my beloved. This is the woman talking. This is the Jewish people. The woman talking. I am to my beloved, and then my beloved is to me. So I love him, and then he loves me. In other words, the initiative is from the people, the woman, the Jewish people. That same book has another expression, exact same expression, but the reverse. Daidi li v'ani li. My beloved is to me, and I am to him. So my beloved is the initiator. And the commentaries talk about this and say, what's happening? It depends. Sometimes God takes the first step, sometimes we take the first step. And early on, this is one of the early, probably 1,000 years ago, there was a book called Avud Raham, he gave a commentary on the prayer. And he says that the month we are in right now, Elul, the month that precedes the high holidays, is an acronym, Ani l'daidi v'daidi li. I am to my beloved, and my beloved is to me. What he means to say is as follows, and all the Hasidic literature talk about this day and night. In other words, hundreds and thousands of pages on this. Passover is the time that God takes the initiative. God came to us, we weren't worthy. God took us out of Egypt. God did the initial step. Then we reciprocated. Then we said, okay, we'll do what you want. But God took the first step. What happens the high holidays? High holidays is different. High holidays is a time we're supposed to reach out to God. That's why we sound the shofar. We take the first step. And that's why Elul, when we prepare for the season of the high holidays, we understand, Ani l'daidi, I have to be to my beloved before my beloved will come to me. In simple English, it means don't wait for the inspiration. You have to generate inspiration within yourself. Especially when you're going into the fall. Fall is a good season, but the fall is depressing because the winter is coming. But in the spring, it's just everything is more exciting. You can wake up in the morning, and as long as it's not a cloudy day, you can expect to be happy. The winter is much more complicated, spiritually speaking, also physically, psychologically, the less sunlight, but also but that just expresses the spiritual idea. Now is the time of the year where we're supposed to take the initiative. Ani l'daidi, I am to my beloved, and my beloved is to me. That is what the idea of 1,000 years ago. Then you get to the Maharsha. Maharsha is about 200 years ago. And the Maharsha says, 1 second. These two verses, 17 and 18, correspond to the notion of I am to my beloved, and my beloved is to me, which means first, we select God this day. You have selected God this day to be your God. And then the Lord has selected you. In other words, it's portraying the relationship between us and God is that the people take the first step. Now, it's probably not what happened in reality, but that's the element of the relationship that we're highlighting. That's what the Maharsha says. It's good to know. Very nice, very inspiring. What am I saying? I have to add something. Otherwise, you could just go to the Maharsha. You don't need me to be here. I think that this is really telling us, but it's just putting into context everything that's going to happen from here until the end of the parsha, till the end of the portion. Many, many verses. The whole rebuke, the whole blessing, the whole accepting the covenant, maybe even till the end of the book. Historically speaking, we say every year there's both. There's Passover and there's the Exodus. Passover, God takes the first step. It's my beloved is to me and I am to him. And high holidays, it's the opposite. We take the first step. I am to my beloved and my beloved is to me. I am to my beloved. We initiate. We generate the inspiration. And then God inspires us. What is happening here? Moshe basically is going to tell the people, when you go into the land of Israel, you should take stones. You should write the Torah down on stones. And then you should gather all the Jewish people, listen to the Lord, and do the ceremony of having the tribes hear the blessing and the curse. Now, why do we need this? Didn't we already get the written version of the Torah at Sinai? Didn't we stand at Sinai and God already tell us what to do? We had one mountain, now it's two mountains. What's the difference? Two works, why can't one work? It sounds like, and it is, a repeat of Sinai, but it's the reverse. So what is Sinai? Sinai is God comes to the Jewish people and he says, here is the Torah, and here's what I want from you, or of you. And that was wonderful, except it didn't. Except it's only one part of the relationship. It didn't work that well. Soon after we started serving idols. The bottom line is we were very passive. Now we come to enter the land of Israel. And the land of Israel, what Moshe is basically saying is you cannot expect Sinai to happen again. You cannot expect for God to come and tell you what he wants and send you inspiration. You have to generate the covenant. You have to generate the inspiration. So if you look carefully, it's the same thing happened. Instead of God writing the Torah, we write the Torah. That's what Moshe says. When you cross the Jordan, this is unbelievable. Right? I'm looking at page 1073, chapter 27, verse 2 and 3. It shall be on the day that you cross the Jordan to the land that Hashem your God gives you. You shall set up great stones, and you shall coat them with plaster. You shall inscribe on them all the words of this Torah when you cross over, so that you may enter the land that Hashem your God gives you. And then you take these same stones and you take it to the mountain, the two mountains where we're going to have a ceremony later. What's happening here is, don't we already have a covenant? Didn't God already tell us what to do? And God says, I'm making the covenant with you. Yes, but that was the one initiated by God. Now we're going into a time, not just time of year, but it's also a time in history where the Jewish people are entering the land of Israel. There are no more miracles of the desert. You cannot expect God to do things for us. We have to take the initiative. And therefore we write the Torah and we declare the covenant and we declare that we're going to keep God's word. Now the relationship is wholesome because you have both elements, not just God taking the initiative and we're responding, which is nice because God is courting us, so it feels good, but that's not a mature relationship. A mature relationship is that at some point we say, okay, inspiration from above is overrated. Now it's my job to generate my own inspiration. And that's what the high holiday season is about. I am for my beloved. You take the first step. You try to meditate. You try to come close to God. And historically, that's what was happening here. You cannot expect God to come to you. You write the Torah, put them on the stones, covered in plaster. Today's day would mean take out a billboard. Billboards back then, but that big stones, make sure everyone could see it, right? Now, and you make a ceremony which declares that Jewish people are going to accept the Torah. By the way, just if you wanted to talk about the physical landscape of this, Sinai, the Jewish people stood at the foot of Mount Sinai, and the voice came from heaven. At this ceremony, it's not exactly clear what happened. It's likely that the Jews were on the mountain, maybe not, but could be they were on the mountain. Maybe they were not, but maybe they're on the mountain. But what's for sure is the Levites were in the valley between both mountains, and the Levites said the covenant, which means that the voice came from the earth, not from heaven, which represents that the human being is generating the inspiration. So therefore, I think that what's happening in verse 17 and 18 on page of chapter 26, that God says today, Moshe says today, God is commanding you the Torah, but look what's happening. You chose God today. That's verse 17. And only therefore, verse 18, that God choose you. In other words, we initiate the relationship, God concludes. Historically, maybe that's not what happened, but that's what's happening today. Don't expect that forever our history is going to be based on God taking the first step. And that, like I said, it ties into the season of the year, but it also ties into the historic season of the shift from the desert living, which we relied completely on God's miracles, to living in the land of Israel, which we need to take initiative, but not just an initiative in the agriculture department, but initiative also in our spiritual and moral department, that we have to be the ones who ensure that the covenant is written and preserved and implemented. So that, ladies and gentlemen, is the story in short. There's a lot more to say. If you want to hear about how the rebuke can be transformed to blessing, you have to come back next year, and you have to remind me that that's what you want to talk about, because I may forget.
Wait, I have one more question.
Please.
If obviously we're now educated and we understand we have to take the first step, kind of like knocking on the door of God and make the first move. But what about all the Jewish people who don't know about that principle? Like, is God not looking out for them because they haven't made the first step? And like, what if they don't know?
Hopefully,
are we all responsible?
So in some sense we are. In other words, that's the point. The point is that we are responsible, and that's what the Levites and you're a Levite. Maimonides says, what's a Levite? In biblical times, a Levite was a person who did not get a portion in the temple in the land of Israel, and their job was to support the priests in the temple and to teach the Torah. Okay, so you happen to maybe doing a little financially better than the Levites because you own some real estate, okay? But Maimonides says, if you want to be a Levite, in other words, if you want to be the figurative Levite, is somebody who is dedicated to spiritual matters, he says anyone could be sanctified like a Levite. So in some sense, the answer is yes, we can't expect God to inspire people. It's our job. And that's what we're doing here. In other words, that's our mission today. So if you're on this call, you certainly, but I'm saying everywhere, we all understand that the mission of Chabad is that not to wait for God to come and inspire people, but we have to go out there and do the advertising, to be God's salespeople. And that's why we do all kinds of PR stunts, like we make music, we take mitzvah things, and we make menorah parades, and we do all kinds of things because yes, we have to be the bearers of the covenant. So that's one answer. But the other answer is that even historically now isn't a time where God doesn't speak to us and we have to initiate it. But individually, like I said, in the year, both things happen. Passover is a time that God will inspire you. So I think that God does find ways to interact with individual people and inspire individual people at different junctures in their life, right? At certain junctures of people's lives. It could be a birth, it could be a passing, it could be whatever it may be. It could be a success, it could be a failure. But I believe that God does take the first initiative in a certain way, maybe not as obvious as Sinai, but in a certain way, God does find a way to inspire you, to communicate with you, to direct you to what you really should be doing. And so there is that God knocking on the door. There is God taking the initiative. But like any mature relationship, just because God does it, at other times I have to do it. Right? If I ask you in your relationship, not you as an individual, but I ask anybody in your relationship, who takes the first step in what? In everything. If it's only one person, then that's not a healthy relationship. Both parties have to take the first step at different times. So the same is true with our relationship with God. So yes, historically, generally speaking, the first answer is it's our responsibility to influence people. And by the way, that's part of why we're scattered around the earth, because inspiration is not just it doesn't have to be explicit, it can be implicit. When somebody sees you and somebody sees how you live your life and someone sees your values, that influences people. And therefore, the fact that we're scattered around the entire earth is because we're influencing people, not just Jews, but Gentiles, and everybody. We all have a circle of influence. Today, forget about it. Everyone has a Facebook page, an Instagram page, and whatever else people are doing. So for sure, you have a circle of influence. But on a deeper level, in some sense, yes, there's going to be times in my life and in your life that God is going to inspire us. The question then becomes, what do we do with that inspiration and how long it lasts? And that's another whole point where inspiration from above doesn't last long. And that's why we also need to generate it on our own. So the short answer is yes, we have to inspire each other. But the other answer is that God also, there are times in our life that God reaches out to us. And hopefully we're listening at those times. We could identify what the inspiration is. Sometimes we're moved, but we don't know exactly, we don't know how to interpret it. So hopefully we're listening when it comes. But again,
Thank you.
It's not that we're sad that we're in a time that we don't have Sinai. No, that's the trajectory. That's what we need to be. We need to be people who are able to self-generate the covenant, who could make a ceremony on our own, who can recreate Sinai on our own. That's really what's happening here. I don't want to get into too many metaphors here, but there's I go to a concert, I'm overwhelmed. The world-class concert, I'm overwhelmed. Beautiful, inspired. How long does the inspiration last? Well, a day or two. Then I come home, and then I learn a few keys on the computer, on the piano. I play, I get inspired. So what's greater? The concert, the symphony is greater, but that doesn't last. The little bit of inspiration that I can generate on my own, in some ways, is much more meaningful. First, it's internalized. Second of all, I can generate it whenever I need it. Right? So I have been changed, as opposed to when God is knocking, that's got, what comes in with all the musicians, and they play a symphony. It's uplifting, it's exciting. But if that doesn't get me to go and study a few notes, eventually I'm not going to be able to preserve that feeling. So that's the story in short. Sorry for the delay in the starting, and sorry for the delay in the concluding, because this parsha is about beginning and ending. So I guess you have to begin on time and end on time. That's the message. Have a wonderful day, everybody. And of course, don't forget about the two main ingredients of joy, which is gratitude and meaning, And I'm very grateful for everybody joining together for this meaningful discussion. So
Rabbi,
I could end the meeting. Thank you. Yes.
I heard one more thing about the writing on the luchot.
Yes.
Is Barbanel says that it's the mezuzah for the land.
Yes.
And since you only put the mezuzah on something that's permanent, then this is showing that this will be the land, our land forever.
Beautiful, beautiful. So what's the mezuzah? There are two mountains and we cross through the valley. And some people say that if you talk about it, so we know where these mountains are, Mount Gerizim, Har Eval, it's right outside Shechem. We know that when Abraham enters the land, he comes through these mountains. When Jacob comes back into the land after being in Haran for 20 years, he also crosses the Jordan and goes straight to Shechem. That's where he buys this piece of land. So historically, that's how the ancestors and that's how the patriarchs entered the land. That's how the Jewish people entered the land. And in some sense, it's the figurative crossing through the mezuzah at the doorposts of the land and declaring the words of the Torah is the theme of the mezuzah. So beautiful. Thank you.
Thank you. It was a beautiful class.
Thank you. Have a wonderful day, everybody. Be well.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.